Hi, my name is Dharani and my video is on everyday actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's so much talk about carbon emissions and greenhouse gases these days, it sometimes feels overwhelming. There's a feeling that businesses are the major polluters, so why should we be responsible to lower our CO2 output, or governments should make bolder decisions which affect the ecosystem? When it comes to the individual, there's a sense of how can I make a difference? I'm just one person. This video is for that one person who's not sure how to reduce their CO2 emissions but would like to. The rationale is if we all collectively agree to be the change we want to see in the world, it would force government and industry to also make changes. What's the problem? CO2 released from burning fuels rise into the atmosphere. These emissions build up in the atmosphere, trap heat, and warm the globe. This is what today we call global warming. Warming of the climate system during the industrialized era due to greenhouse gases are 40% higher than the pre-industrialized levels. Businesses, consumers, and governments emit carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and other gases into the atmosphere. Examples of CO2 emissions are burning fossil fuels, making cement, raising cattle, and clearing land. The intensity of this into the atmosphere leads to sea level rise, shift in rainfall patterns, increased storm intensity, and frequency of sudden climate changes. There are still politicians, scientists, and citizens who believe global warming is a hoax. Their logic is that the warming of the planet has not been steady and that natural variability adds or subtracts to human factors. It is well known that every 10 and 100-year periods, temperatures fluctuate. That's why in the initial 21st century period, there was a slowdown in the warming. But as we can see in the last few years, the temperature has risen dramatically. What does it mean in Canada? When the global temperature increases by 2 degrees Celsius, in Canada, we will see a 2 to 4 degrees Celsius increase. Amongst the G20 countries, per capita emissions is on average 7.5 tons, compared to Canada at 18.9 tons. For the first time in recorded history, we reached atmospheric CO2 levels of 415 parts per million. To put that into perspective, outdoor air is usually 250 to 400 parts per million, and an occupied space with good air exchange is usually 400 to 1,000 parts per million. At these levels, we're going to see increased levels of damages from storms, humans not being able to breathe outdoors, reduced food and agricultural production, and ecosystem deterioration. Our carbon footprint is the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions that comes from production, use, and end of life of a product or service. In Canada, the major contributors of greenhouse gas emissions are from burning fuel and electricity, which is 45%, transportation sector, which is 28%, and agriculture, which encompasses 8%. Burning fuel for electricity is the largest contributor of emissions in Canada. This is mainly due to the cold temperatures for approximately 9 months of the year. But that doesn't mean we have to waste electricity. Some things that we could do are to conserve heat, so that is using a programmable thermostat, and to remember to maintain a stable temperature in the house, and that you could do that by keeping the blinds closed during the day. Another thing you can do is turn off the lights, appliances, and power sources when you're not using them. This seems like a no-brainer, but I fall prey to this often, where I leave my computer and thinking I'm going to come right back, and I come back hours later with the computer still on and the lights in the room still on. So one thing to be conscious of is every time you leave the computer, turn it off to sleep mode, and every time you leave a room, no matter what, turn the lights off. Also, it's not something that you think about often, but to turn down your water heater to 50 degrees Celsius. And that you can see by going to see your water heater and seeing what temperature it's at currently. And using LED lights. It's expensive initially, but at the end you save more money on energy and the lights last longer. CO2 emissions from transportation has surpassed emissions from electricity generation. This is partly due to the shift from using coal to renewable resources and natural gases. Also, Canada covers a large landmass, so travel is heavily dependent on fossil fuels. Going carless for a year can reduce your CO2 emissions by 2.6 tons. So alternatives would be bike to work, take the bus to get your groceries, and use a train for short trips. Realistically, most people will not give up their car. So things you can do are, when you're purchasing a new car, look for the SmartWay certification. And don't always assume that hybrid or electric cars are the best way to go. Research where the closest charging station is and find out what the pre and the post-production life is for that vehicle. Secondly, drive efficiently. So that means to service your car, check your tire pressures, don't weigh your car down, don't heavily use your air conditioner. Thirdly, you could limit intensive city driving, and when you're driving long distances, use cruise control. And also lastly, you could carpool or car share. A major component of greenhouse gases in transportation is flying. So one way you could reduce your impact is by offsetting your carbon footprint. That is, you could, when you're at home, take the bus, or you could donate money to a sustainable charity. For example, when I was living in England, I became a vegetarian for the time I was there. This was my way to offset my carbon emissions for traveling there and back. Most people don't realize that the food choices we make impact our carbon footprint. There are two ways we can reduce this: what we eat and by how we buy. The production of red meat uses a lot of feed, water, destroys land, and cows produce methane emissions. Most people swap one emitter for another. So by eating a fish diet based on deep sea net fishing, it can emit just as much emissions as beef. By eating a plant-based diet, which is lower in the food chain, you create half a pound of CO2 compared to 6 pounds of CO2 from beef. But again, most people will not give up meat. For meat lovers, swapping carbon-intensive meal for a chicken or a veggie meal a week helps to lower their footprint. A study showed that buying locally for a year is equivalent to saving travel of 1,609 kilometers compared to eating one veggie meal per week, which saved 1,960 kilometers of travel. So secondly is how we buy. We waste 40% of what we buy. So first thing is to make a shopping list before you go shopping. That way you know what's in your fridge and you know what you already have. Bulk foods might be cheaper, but if you don't end up eating it and it spoils, it ends up in the garbage. Reuse leftovers. One of our favorite nights of the week in my house is leftover night. So we get all of our Tupperware containers out of the fridge and we make a meal out of it. It's always tasty and it saves us from having to cook a meal one night of the week. Lastly, to freeze food. So it allows the food to last longer and the taste is just as good. There's been a lot of grumbling regarding the carbon tax imposed by the federal government. I just want to take this opportunity to explain to individuals how they can benefit from this tax and how it can impact their carbon footprint. A carbon tax puts a direct price on emissions to the fuel producers and the distributors. To motivate emitters to decrease emissions, the price goes up slowly over time with the intention that households and industries will adopt less carbon-intensive practices. So the federal government's plan is a $10 per ton per year increase with a maximum of a $50 cap, which is reached by 2022. So the consumer does not have to pay directly, but faces higher prices on goods and services. The federal government plans to do a carbon tax backstop policy, which helps Canadian households by providing an annual rebate based on the expenses of that province. Making wise carbon choices has a twofold benefit for the individual citizen. First, you save money. You save money by using alternative transportation methods, which reduces the amount of gas you purchase. You save money by eating one veggie meal per week and buying less food, which reduces your grocery bills. And you save money by turning off your lights and reduce the amount you heat your house, which reduces your electricity bill. And secondly, Ontarians will receive approximately a $300 rebate from the carbon tax. So you can choose to look at the carbon tax as another tax grab or a way to help the environment for our future generations and to put some extra cash in your savings account or a train ride to wine country. Thank you for taking the time for listening to me today, and I hope this video helps you see the small things that you can do as an individual to bring forth change and environmental sustainability. Thank you.